Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach, and we are following breaking news from New York City. The largest judgment to date has been issued against former President Donald Trump. Judge Engoron has imposed a penalty of more than $350 million against Donald Trump, his adult sons, and his corporation in the civil fraud case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Well, the former president is being ordered to pay more than $354 million in damages. His co-defendants are being ordered to pay another $10 million in fines. The judge has also banned the former president from conducting business in the state of New York over the next 3 years. Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. are also prevented from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation for the next 2 years.
Hi, everyone. Adam is here. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw a number so massive it actually made you stop scrolling and say, wait, what? Not lottery hypotheticals, not government budget abstractions, but real money attached to a real person with a real deadline. $454 million. That's the number a New York judge just carved into stone and handed to Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is facing $500 million in legal penalties, an amount that's growing by tens of thousands every day. The judgment in his New York civil fraud trial represents one of the biggest tests of the former president's personal wealth in decades.
He is probably going to have to liquidate assets, and I think it is going to put tremendous pressure on the Trump organization, and there's a risk that it all begins to cascade.
And he's up against the clock. For now, he has until late March to come up with the funds. Otherwise, the New York Attorney General could begin to seize some of his assets.
Not a settlement he negotiated. Not a fine he agreed to pay over a handshake. A judge sat in a courtroom, signed his name to a piece of paper, and said, "You owe this much." And here's the part that will make your head spin. While you were reading that sentence, interest just added another $1,300 to the total. Because every single day, $114,000 gets tacked onto that number whether Trump pays it or not. Every single day.
On February 16th, a New York judge ordered Trump to pay $355 million in penalties, plus another $100 million in interest, which will continue to grow by roughly $100,000 per day. This comes after the judge found the former president fraudulently valued parts of his real estate empire to secure more favorable loans.
The case is a complete and total sham. It's a sham case.
Now, before you scroll past this thinking, it's just another Trump headline in an endless sea of Trump headlines. Stop. This one is different. This isn't about classified documents or election interference or any of the political battles you've been hearing about for years. This is about money. Raw, unforgiving, bank account draining money. This is about a judge who looked at Trump's business empire and said, "You inflated your assets."
Donald Trump found himself in another courtroom Monday. The former president went on trial for fraud in a New York civil case against him and his family business that could deal a major blow to his real estate empire.
This is a continuation of the single greatest witch hunt of all time.
Trump, the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, is accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars to secure better loan and insurance terms. Before entering the courtroom, Trump called the case a scam.
Just so you know, my financial statements are phenomenal. They are actually less in terms of the numbers used than the actual net worth. The actual net worth is substantially more.
New York Attorney General Letitia James is pursuing the case.
The law is both powerful and fragile. No matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law.
You made your properties look more valuable than they actually were, and you did it to get better loans and better insurance deals. And then that judge didn't just slap a fine on the table, he went thermonuclear. He banned Trump from running any company in New York for 3 years, banned him from borrowing from New York banks. His sons Eric and Don Jr. got 2-year bans from leadership roles. The entire Trump organization got put on a leash in the state that built it.
The former chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, and the former controller of the Trump Organization, Jeffrey McConney, are each banned from serving as an officer or director of any New York company for 3 years. Mr. Weisselberg and Mr. McConney are also banned for life from serving in a financial management role in any New York company. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump are banned from serving as an officer or director of any New York company for 2 years. And Donald Trump and his companies are banned from applying for loans from any New York bank or financial institution for 3 years.
But here's what the headlines aren't telling you. Here's the twist that changes everything. In August of 2025, just a few months ago, an appeals court looked at this entire case and said something remarkable. They said this penalty is excessive. They said it's unconstitutional under something called the Excessive Fines Clause, which is part of the Eighth Amendment. So wait, if an appeals court threw out the penalty, why are we still talking about paying? Great question. Because that's not how appeals work. The original order is still sitting there. The interest is still piling up at over $100,000 a day. And now we're in this bizarre legal limbo where Trump's lawyers are fighting multiple battles at once. They're trying to get the whole thing thrown out. They're trying to stop the interest from compounding. They're trying to overturn the bans. And while all of this is happening, the Supreme Court just opened its new term with a docket full of cases about presidential power, executive authority, and exactly how much legal trouble a sitting president can actually be in. Now let me tell you why this matters right now in this exact moment. Because this isn't happening in isolation. This $454 million order is colliding with something much bigger. At the same time, Trump's team is fighting this fraud case. There are legal battles brewing over his tariffs, and if those tariffs get struck down by the courts, we're not talking about millions anymore. We're talking about potential refunds estimated at $165 billion. Billion with a B. Companies that paid those duties would demand their money back. So you've got this payback narrative exploding on multiple fronts. $454 million here, $165 billion there, and all of it landing on a sitting president in his second term. This isn't some candidate fighting off lawsuits from years ago. This is the actual occupant of the Oval Office dealing with court orders that tell him to write checks with 9 figures on them. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, okay, but didn't he actually do something wrong? Didn't he inflate his assets? And look, the judge said yes. The case said yes. But the appeals court looked at the punishment and said, pump the brakes, this is too much. So now you've got this fundamental fight over whether the original ruling was justice or overreach or political theater, or all three mixed together. And that's what makes this so explosive. Because depending on who you ask, this is either accountability finally catching up, or it's lawfare. It's using the courts as a weapon. It's New York trying to take down a political enemy from 200 miles away. Let's rewind and understand how we actually got here, because the details matter and most people don't know them. February 2024, Judge Arthur Engoron sits down and signs a formal judgment that drops the hammer. $354.9 million in penalties plus interest that had already been piling up. Total comes to $454.2 million. And then he adds those restrictions, those bans that effectively kicked Trump out of the New York business world for years. Now, what was this case even about? Because when people hear fraud, they usually think someone stole money from someone else. But that's not what happened here. This was a civil case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Her argument was that Trump and his organization systematically inflated the value of their properties, their golf courses, their buildings, to make them look more valuable on paper than they actually were. Why would he do that? Because if you're trying to get a loan from a bank and you tell them your building is worth $500 million when it's really worth $200 million, the bank gives you a much better deal. Lower interest rates, bigger loans, better terms. Same thing with insurance. You want better policies? Make your assets look more valuable. Trump's team said no. This is how real estate works. Valuations are subjective. Banks do their own research. Nobody got hurt. Nobody lost money. The loans got paid back with interest. Where's the victim? And honestly, that's a legitimate question because in most fraud cases, someone loses money. Someone gets ripped off. But here, the banks made money. They got repaid with interest. The insurance companies collected premiums and never had to pay out massive claims tied to inflated values. So who's the victim? New York said the system itself is the victim. The integrity of financial reporting, the trust in the market, that's what got damaged. and Judge Engoron agreed. He ruled that Trump committed fraud and needed to be punished. But here's where it gets messy. That $354.9 million penalty, where did that number actually come from? The state argued it represented the financial benefits Trump gained from inflated valuations over the years. The interest savings, the better deals, add it all up and you get that number. Trump's side said, you're making this up, you're pulling numbers out of thin air, and you're doing it because you hate Trump politically. And then in August 2025, an appeals court looked at this and said, actually, this penalty is excessive. They didn't say Trump was innocent. They didn't throw out the fraud finding. But they said the punishment didn't fit the crime. They invoked the excessive fines clause and said this $500 million penalty was unconstitutional. So now you've got this impossible situation. The original order says $454 million, interest ticking up every day, bans in place. But the appeals court says the penalty is too much. And Trump's legal team is fighting this on every level, trying to get the whole thing thrown out, trying to stop the interest, trying to overturn the restrictions. And while all this is happening, the Supreme Court just started its new term with cases that could reshape everything. Cases about presidential power, about what a president can and can't do, about how much legal exposure a sitting president actually faces. And it's not just this case. Remember the tariffs I mentioned earlier? Trump's administration has been pushing sweeping tariffs on imports, and there are legal challenges brewing. People are saying these tariffs are unconstitutional, that Trump doesn't have the authority to impose them the way he did. And if the Supreme Court rules against those tariffs, we're talking about refunds, massive refunds. Companies that paid those duties want their money back. Estimates say $165 billion, maybe more. So you've got this payback theme running through everything. Pay back $454 million in the fraud case. Pay back $165 billion if the tariffs get struck down. It's like the courts are setting up this giant reckoning where accountability could hit on multiple fronts at once. Politically, this is rocket fuel. If you're on the left, you're looking at this saying, finally, accountability, nobody's above the law. If you're on the right, you're saying this is lawfare, this is New York going after Trump because they hate him, this is political persecution. And the appeals court already admitted the penalty was too much. Both sides have a story to tell. Both sides have facts to back it up, and that's what makes this so explosive. Here's what actually happens next. The money, $454 million, is still the number on the original court order. Even though the appeals court said the penalty is excessive, that order is technically active until all appeals are done. Which means, in theory, the interest keeps climbing over $114,000 per day. Trump's team isn't just sitting there watching the meter run. They've been fighting this hard, filing appeals, trying to pause the interest, trying to get the whole thing thrown out. The August 2025 ruling was huge because it gave them ammunition to say, look, even the appeals court thinks this is too much. But until the appeals process is completely finished, until there's a final ruling that wipes the slate clean, that number hangs over everything. Then there are the restrictions, the bans on running companies in New York, the bans on borrowing from New York banks. Trump's team has been fighting those too, saying they're unconstitutional, saying they're designed to destroy his business empire. And whether you think Trump deserves this or not, telling someone they can't run a business in one of the biggest states in the country is a big deal. And then there's the Supreme Court. The court just opened its new term with major cases coming up related to presidential power. What can a president do? What kind of legal exposure does a sitting president have? How much immunity do they get? Those cases could have a direct impact on how Trump's legal battles play out. If the court says presidents have broad immunity, that changes the game. If they say presidents are subject to the same laws as everyone else, that's a different game entirely. And then the tariff cases. If the Supreme Court rules that Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional, that he overstepped his executive authority, we're looking at potential refunds in the hundreds of billions. Companies would demand their money back. The government would have to figure out how to pay, and that payback narrative would explode. Imagine the headlines. Trump ordered to pay back billions in tariffs. Trump owes $454 million in fraud case. It all starts to blend together into this giant story about accountability, about power, about whether the rules apply to everyone. What does this mean for the rest of us? Because whether you love Trump or hate him, whether you think this case is justice or persecution, the principles at stake matter. Can the government hit you with a $500 million penalty in a case where nobody lost money? Should they be able to? Or is that government overreach? And on the flip side, if someone lies to banks, inflates their assets, breaks the rules to get better deals, should they face consequences? Or do we just shrug and say that's business? These aren't easy questions, and the answers depend a lot on your values, your politics, your view of how the system should work. This case, this $454 million order, is not going away. The appeals will keep grinding, the Supreme Court will keep ruling, and every step of the way, this is going to be front-page news because it's Trump and because the stakes are so high. We've got a sitting president facing a court order to pay nearly $500 million. We've got an appeals court saying that penalty is excessive but the original order still standing. We've got the Supreme Court about to rule on cases that could reshape presidential power. And we've got this broader payback narrative tying together fraud cases, tariff battles, and political warfare. The punchline is simple. We're just getting started. As this case moves through the courts, as the Supreme Court issues its rulings, as the political fights heat up, this story is going to keep evolving. New twists, new rulings, new headlines. And you can absolutely bet that every step of the way, both sides are going to be screaming at the top of their lungs about what it all means. So buckle up, because if you thought $454 million was the end of the story, you haven't been paying attention. This is just the beginning.